you work in cybersecurity, your newsfeed is probably full of speculation about the many ways threat actors are going to take advantage of artificial intelligence, or AI, to further their sinister purposes. But when we asked security professionals about their outlook on AI, the picture was surprisingly optimistic. When asked whether generative AI was a net negative for security teams, a net positive, or neutral, only 6% answered negative. Nearly half said they thought it was a net positive. And that optimism is particularly striking in light of the very real challenges that AI-wielding threat actors pose, and some concerning signs that security teams might be behind the eight ball when it comes to countering those threat actors, which we'll go into later in this episode. Hi, I'm Jeff Abbott, and you're listening to Executive Summary, a podcast where we discuss the latest research into IT, security, and the future of work, and what it all means for your business strategy. And joining me on the podcast today, we have Rob May. Rob's an author, speaker, and executive chairman and founder of Ramsack, and an expert on cybersecurity and AI. Rob, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward to discussing some of the pressing issues and fascinating developments in the world of cybersecurity and AI. There's so much that we can talk about.
It's not a boring place to be right now, is it?
No, certainly not.
Well, look, before we get started, I'd like to give just a little bit of background on the research I was just citing. The report is called Inflection Point, and it's Ivanti's 2024 State of Cybersecurity Preparedness Report. And in this report, we surveyed 7,300 security professionals, executives, and office workers around the world to uncover the biggest obstacles in security and to determine what the most advanced security organizations are doing differently in 2024. And the report covers a wide range of topics within cybersecurity, and today we're covering just one of them. So I certainly encourage all of our listeners to go to the show notes for more details on that report. Let's get started. Rob, you're on the record as saying that right now in today's landscape, the deck is really stacked in favor of the threat actors, and that they're better able to take advantage of AI than IT and security organizations right now. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Sure. And I think this is due primarily to the speed and the sophistication with which AI can be employed in attacks, including, leveraging GANs for spoofing and tampering or creating fake audio or video clips that are really difficult for us on the defense side to distinguish. And, reading the report, it highlighted to me those risks posed by third-party vendors as a high-risk entry point for AI-powered attacks. More than half of the organizations surveyed have not audited these vendors for risks related to generative AI. And I think it's obvious that whilst there is a general sense of optimism about AI's role in cybersecurity, because it's a massive enabler, it's tempered by the recognition that the field's currently tilted towards the threat actors.
Yeah.
There's tremendous potential to benefit defenders, but we need a whole load of development and adoption and adaptation of these AI technologies in our cybersecurity strategies.
And one thing that strikes me, Rob, is we certainly can read every day in the media in general, if not the trade sources for IT and security. We can certainly read about the optimism and the excitement and the upside. Interestingly, the threat actors don't publish their excitement. They don't publish, how they're going to take advantage of the technology. So, folks like yourself have to kind of research that and be ahead of that. And help me with this. Help me square the stance that we see in the survey, which again indicates that nearly half of the respondents said that AI is a net positive for security. Only 6% saying it was negative. Are they wrong? Put this in context with your point about, kind of next generation threat actor activity. How are the teams that are responsible for combating, how are they looking at it, perhaps with jaded eyes?
I think that one of the issues here is they look at the defense tools, and we look at how we use AI and managed learning in the defense, in our SIEMs and so on. And you look at that and you think this gives us major advantages. However, they're not prepared, they're not strategizing, and they're not necessarily giving enough credit to all the different ways in which the cyber criminals are using AI in order to launch their attacks.
I gotcha. I think one way to look at it is you got to really assume the role of the threat actor as a security professional. You got to think kind of in reverse, not all the upsides to AI from a defense perspective, but what goodies it presents to you as the bad guy, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's look at some more specific examples of as you started to point out how AI is amplifying threats. When we asked in this study, when we asked respondents what threat vectors they thought had grown more dangerous as a result of AI, by far the most common answer was phishing, followed by software vulnerabilities and ransomware attacks. But Rob, let's start with, how does AI actually amplify these phishing threats?
So, I mean, on the phishing side, there's a number of things. One, we can train generative AI to take on, the behaviors of a persona. So I can train it to be you just by uploading written material that you've written to say, this is Jeff. And then when I ask it to write an email in the style of Jeff, it's very convincing. But in addition to that, we're then seeing deep fakes as far as video content's concerned, or just voice content, people synthesizing digital content and using that in their phishing attacks. So from that perspective, that's from that social engineering piece, that's where AI is coming into play.
I actually heard an example of exactly what you're describing. A friend of mine in security said, employee got an email, phishing email, right? As soon as it was opened, within 60 seconds, phone on their desk rings, and it is a voice modulated threat actor, AI driven, delivering a message to confirm what was in the phishing email and make it seem even more legitimate. I mean, that's just next level threat, isn't it?
Absolutely that. Yeah. And that's just one element of the risks that AI poses, I think, in the hands of cyber criminals.
Well, so let's talk about that for a second. When you look at the overall threat landscape through the lens of AI, what are you most concerned about?
I think that attackers can use the power of AI to quickly identify and exploit vulnerabilities, scanning networks, launching sophisticated attacks. AI can be used to build malware that evades detection by mimicking normal network behavior. And AI's learning can place powerful algorithms into the hands of what might be inexperienced cyber criminals, but broadening their abilities and the scope of them as potential attackers. Plus, there's also the risk of AI systems themselves being hacked and turned against the organization that they were designed to protect.
Let's talk about preparedness for a second in light of AI, Rob. A point I found quite concerning, looking again back to the study and the data, was that security organizations really seem to be lagging in their preparedness to counter these types of attacks. In fact, 1 in 3 said they don't even have a documented strategy for addressing the risks that come with generative AI. So when we think about this, from your view, Rob, what does security preparedness even look like in this new landscape? How can security teams catch up, so to speak?
So there's a couple of things, I think. On the one hand, there's the traditional training route, and we can't ignore training. People need to be trained. On the other hand, there's an argument that says training can't keep up with new systems and new threats. So it can't just be training. Training needs to go hand in hand with the AI and the managed learning security tools. But I think it's really important that we think about this in terms of leveraging AI and technological innovations alongside human expertise. People are talking about AI systems with human in the loop, where we can't just rely on the AI tools. AI tools are a great enabler. I was talking to somebody about a co-pilot the other day, and I said the important thing to remember is it's a co-pilot, not an autopilot. It's there to assist you with this process. And I think the balanced approach is essential to mitigate vulnerabilities. And I'd encourage organizations to focus both on operational improvements as well as defense-driven defense tactics. That includes cyber AI governance, hiring AI expertise, assessing vendor risk and compliance, looking at that whole supply chain, adopting strategies and guidelines for using generative AI in our organizations, as well as there's a whole hygiene piece about your data governance and practice and data cleansing, data access and visibility, and then just empowering collaboration and reducing shadow IT as well around this, and reducing the number of tools and licenses that are often in place.
Yeah, I think if I kind of net out the heart of your point is you can't responsible use of AI doesn't mean you punt or you abandon solid, known best practice security and IT hygiene and those initiatives that require a lot of intelligence and experience and so on are not replaced by AI at all. Can they be enhanced? Of course, but I think your point is responsible use of AI, an active understanding of the role it can play and can't play, is what's required here, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, Rob, we like to typically close these kind of discussions with some guidance, an action item or two for the listeners. So, in light of what we've covered today, is there a short list of actions or advice that you would give to our listeners to consider with AI and security?
Yes, I mean, at the root of a lot of this, and we've talked to this a little bit already, but having a proper strategic approach, having proper policies. In fact, in my latest book, Harnessing AI, I take readers through a process of working out these strategies to implement, because I think it's key to evolving with AI and security. We need a well-documented strategic approach that combines the strength of both human expertise and AI-powered tools, ensuring a robust and adaptable defense mechanism against a landscape of ever-changing digital threats. And I think it's not just about this strategic approach either. I think organizations need to think about their usage and their policies. So many organizations I talk to don't even have a generative AI usage policy for all staff. What's safe? What isn't safe? How are we controlling how people are using this tech? Because if we don't control that side of it, then also we open ourselves up for further data risk and potentially further risk when it comes to cyber attack as well.
I couldn't agree more. From where I sit in terms of leading a company, one of the first things that I sat down and did with my senior executive team is said, what, we have to first establish a doctrine and a policy on responsible use of AI, what it is and what it's not. And we actually, started with what we call the AIGC, an AI governance committee that oversees how it is we're going to, ideate, test, and ultimately put into production AI. And we've been kind of slow and deliberate over the first 6 or 9 months of this so that we get used to, what it is and what it's not, to the point you made. And that's been extremely valuable. I think the risk sometimes in these, emerging technologies, and let's face it, this is one that's here to stay, is the hype cycle consumes, both the leadership team and the employee base at large. And you forget, like anything else, this is a tool. and you have to evaluate its use and its proper context inside the organization and what it can be. And I think a point you made in your comments earlier in the discussion was particularly important. Seek out advice, seek out partnerships with other organizations that make sense to perhaps form a sort of a think tank or a consortium to see what's working for them and not what's working for you. And I think that's where we are with this is kind of cautious optimism and responsible application is the key in the early stages. Don't you agree?
Totally. And I think there's a big rush, organizations are rushing to do this. It's the latest thing as far as everyone's concerned.
Bright shiny object, isn't it?
It is. Despite the fact that we've had AI for, decades, in terms of generative AI, it's the latest shiny thing that everybody wants and everybody's rushing to deploy it. But I think there's two things there. One, the point that you just spoke to, don't try and reinvent the wheel. There are other people trying to do exactly the same thing. So let's collaborate. Let's talk what's working for you and what isn't. And then the other thing is just that understanding that we've got the security aspects right and that we're deploying this securely. I think that we will see in the industry in the next 12 months a whole load of cases where people have turned on generative AI across their organizations without doing all the data hygiene, without controlling what's accessible and what's not, or even just saying, do you know what, all of these documents are now not relevant and they're archive. Because if people don't do that and they just turn on some of this technology, the AI will consume anything it can find and use that for the answers. And you could have it reading stuff that you don't want it to read and giving the wrong answers. And I think we will see problems over the next 12 months where people have just rushed to get these tools in place without doing it securely.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think there is huge risk in that across the organization. But on the topic of the day here and security, those kinds of rushes and mistakes and inexplicable exuberance can create massive risks and problems. So couldn't agree more with your advice there. Rod, listen, thank you so much for being with us today. I thought your content and your point of view is exceptionally helpful for our listeners. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you.
Hey, if you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe and even better, share the podcast with a friend or a colleague. You can see the research we discussed today at Ivanti.com. That's IVANTI.com/state of cyber. Or just follow the links to the show notes. You can find out more about Ivanti and our solutions at Ivanti.com or follow us on social media. Our handle is @GoIvanti. I'm your host, Jeff Babbitt, and I hope to see you next time on Executive Summary.